Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. I'm your host, Danielle Nierenberg. So it was about this time last year that the Food Tank team and I started really pivoting to online events instead of doing in-person events for obvious reasons. We started a daily live stream so that we could get a sense of how COVID-19 was impacting the food system, from restaurant and school closures to how farmers were struggling with supply chain disruptions, and how they and grocery store workers and so many other food workers were forced to be on the front lines of the pandemic, that we didn't quite understand at that time. We also talked to a lot of public health advocates, including our guest today, Dr. Mark Hyman. And many of those public health experts and doctors were really seeing how diets were impacting those who were getting COVID, and how it was a struggle for people with obesity or hypertension or other issues to really survive the disease and get through it in a way. So I think it's clear to so many of us now that COVID is at least partly a diet related disease. And I'm so glad to have Dr. Mark Hyman back with us. He's come out with a new book, The Pegan Diet, 21 Practical Reasons for Reclaiming Your Health in a Nutritionally Confusing World. It is certainly a nutritionally confusing world, Dr. Hyman. He is the founder and the director of the Ultra Wellness Center, the head of strategy and innovation at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, a 13-time New York Times bestselling author, and board president for clinical affairs for the Institute for Functional Medicine. He's the host of one of the leading health podcasts, The Doctor's Pharmacy. And Dr. Hyman is a regular medical contributor on several television shows and networks, including CBS This Morning, Today, Good Morning America, The View, and CNN. Mark, always so nice to see you. Thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations on the book. Mark, I can't hear you.
Thanks, Danny. It's great to see you guys again. I'm glad to be back.
We're so happy to have you. So tell me what the last year for you has been like as a doctor.
Oh, well, it's been a pivot for sure. As a doctor in the healthcare field, I've been really focused on, what the truth is about COVID, which is hard to discern in all the conspiracy theories and confusion and misinformation, both from, traditional sources and, kind of fringe sources. So I'm trying to look at what the science is telling us about how do we get to the root cause of why we're all so susceptible to the ravages of COVID, and why are Americans dying more than any other country? Why are we affected more than any other country? And it's not just bad leadership. I think that we really see that in this country we have a pandemic upon a pandemic of chronic disease, which is underneath the pandemic of COVID. And so as a doctor, I really focused on how do we start thinking differently about what we're doing in this country and in terms of COVID and just in general. And it's really clear to me that the the biggest reason we're so struggling is because of our food system and our food supply and our food. Six times more likely to be in the hospital if you're having a food-related illness such as obesity, heart disease, diabetes, so forth. And you're 12 times more likely to die if you are overweight or have one of these chronic diseases that's food-related from COVID. That's a staggering number. 12. I mean, there's nothing in medicine that's like 12 times. So if you see, your risk of heart disease goes down by 30% if you take a statin. 30%. Is 0.3 times. It's not 12 times, right? And so it's really been clear to me that we need to wake up to the fact that our food is causing us to be pre-inflamed from this metabolic disease that we have. It's insulin resistance from the starch and sugar, from the processed calories that we eat, which is 60% of our diet. And those foods are driving this underlying inflammation that makes us a sitting duck for COVID. And that's why we're seeing these radical spikes in deaths and hospitalization in this country compared to others because of this underlying chronic disease. So that's been a big focus. And of course, we've switched all my practice to virtual and had to sort of adjust everything like you have, just my podcast, just to get people to be able to sort of adapt to new world. But I think it's actually allowed our practice to expand. It's allowed us to see virtual patients from all over the world that we haven't been able to see. And there's some silver linings within it,
Sure.
but I surely would roll the clock back if I could.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I kind of feel the same way. I've interviewed people who I would never otherwise have, had the chance to interview. And it's been really interesting to hear their thoughts. But yeah, if I could go back in time, I certainly would too. And if only we'd had a crystal ball. So you've obviously used your time well. Again, the Pegan diet.
Pegan.
Sorry.
Pegan, that's a kind of a animistic religion. This is not a religion. This is the opposite of a religion, because most diet wars are based on sort of religious views around food, which is part of the problem. We have these ideological battles around paleo or vegan and the diet wars that make so many people confused. Should you be keto or low fat, low carb? Should you be raw, or should you, be lectin free or whatever? It's like whatever the latest fad of the day is. And it's gotten people to be where they just don't know what to do. They don't know what to eat, and they're confused. And consumers are confused. Doctors are confused. Nutritionists are confused. The government certainly is confused by their recommendations. And so I wanted to sort of come up with a set of principles that allows us to navigate what we eat in an intelligent way that's based on science and common sense, that aspires to be regenerate human health, regenerate communities, and regenerate the earth and the climate and the soil and the ecosystems that we live in. So how do we sort of create a regenerative system of eating and food, as opposed to an extractive, destructive system, which is what we have now? And that's really the purpose of the book, is just how do we sort of start to think differently about food and get out of this sort of dichotomies that we're in. And what occurred to me was I was on a panel once with a friend of mine who was a paleo doc, another one's a vegan cardiologist, and they were fighting. And I was like, well, if you're paleo and you're vegan, I must be Pegan. And everybody laughed. And I thought, oh, this is a really good joke. Yeah. And then I thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute, they're almost identical except for where you get the protein. Otherwise, they're the same. No dairy, lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of seeds, good fats, whole foods, no processed food. I mean, it's the same, right? And if you look at the idealized version, not a chips and soda vegan or a bacon and cream paleo person, but I think, or maybe they wouldn't eat cream because they're paleo, but you get what I'm saying. And so I began to think, they have far more in common with each other, and so do most dietary approaches to wellness than they do with the traditional American diet or the SAD diet. And that's just so clear to me that that's the enemy, not each other. And let's kind of get together and create a big tent where we can be inclusive. We can actually understand quality. And there's a couple of principles in there that I really think are the most important in guiding people's choices around food. One is quality, and the other is personalization. And by quality, the reason that's so important is because food is medicine. It's not like medicine. It's actually a biological force that drives all the biochemistry in our body, and all the hormones and all the metabolism and everything that goes on, from what we're made of to all our molecules running around, and ultimately to be driven by food. And so understanding that the quality and the information of the food is far more important than the calories is so key, because you can have 500 calories of broccoli or 500 calories of soda. Are they the same? Well, most scientists, most doctors, most nutritionists, the government, the food industry all say they're identical. And in fact, I've asked this of a soda company executive, and they are identical in a lab when you burn them, but they're not identical when you eat them, because they go through your biochemistry and your metabolism. Sort of like feathers and lead. If you drop them from a bridge, the feathers are going to float down and the lead will drop right away. Whereas if you drop them in a vacuum, they drop at the same time. So the difference is air, and our metabolism is like the air that the food has to go through. So I think quality is so important. And I think in the book, I go through how do we pick the best of each ingredient of what we're eating. We can eat anything, whether we want to eat flour. Well, what kind of flour should we eat? Well, flour is not that great because it's made from, wheat, which is in this country is, hybridized to create super starch that drives diabetes. It has extra gliadin proteins that are more likely to cause gluten sensitivity. It is preserved with calcium propionate, which can cause neurologic issues in kids and autism and animal models and hyperactivity, and maybe sprayed with glyphosate at harvest to desiccate it. So you've got all this horrible situation, and that will literally cause all this havoc in your system and can cause inflammation in your gut, and the gluten can be there. Whereas if you have flour from a plant like Himalayan tartary buckwheat, which is a ancient grain from the Himalayas, it survived really tough conditions and produced all these phytochemicals, high amounts of protein, very low glycemic load. it's one of the most nutrient-dense compounds on the planet. It has 132 phytochemicals, which are immune rejuvenating. So if you're eating, you can have pancakes. Like in my book, I have chai pancakes recipe, and I'm like, why is Dr. Hyman recommending pancakes? Well, if you look, it's almond flour, it's eggs, and it's buckwheat flour, but I use the Himalayan buckwheat, which is an upgrade. And so the information in that food is helping my body heal and repair as opposed to being harmed. And there's 100 examples like that of why food is so important. And then we can't get stuck on dogma. If we think we should be a vegan, but we do it and we feel like crap, well, your body's telling you something. Listen to your body. And so there's ways of personalization. And one of the chapters in the book is leveraging personalized nutrition, which it teaches you how you can map out what your particular best way of eating is.
Right, right. You mentioned, food is medicine. That has obviously come up, especially over the last years. This idea is food is medicine, and how important, food for our actual health is. It's not just fuel; it's keeping us healthy. But it's also funny that you mentioned a major soda company, because I recently spoke to one of the executives at one of those sugary beverage companies, and they said the idea of food as medicine is very controversial. And
oh yes, of course it is.
My eyes got very big. But
so is the fact that soda is connected to obesity. That's very controversial.
Right. So, I mean, how do you counteract that when we're talking about these things?
It's kind of fake news, honestly. I mean, you have to understand that these companies are, they're in some ways amoral. They're not evil in the sense that they're trying to do something bad, but their guiding principles are not about the well-being of their customers or society, and that's unfortunate. And there's increasing attention to this in the Business Roundtable to create, a bigger concept of what should be a shareholder. It should be a stakeholder instead of a shareholder value, right? So in that case, if your stakeholders are the ones who are eating your food, that's a problem if they're getting sick. I think there's, it's just an unfortunate situation where the food industry is trying to grasp on and hold on to its market share while people are sort of drifting away. And so, in this country, soda sales are way down, but in other countries, they're way up, in the developing world, where they're way behind us and sort of catching up about how bad it is. So we're really, unfortunately stuck with enormous amounts of money spent on educating us about what to eat through advertising and marketing and manipulation of kids. And so we're all driven towards these choices about food that are really killing us. And the truth is that, the food industry benefits from saying that all calories are the same, that food isn't medicine, that everything is fine in moderation, that you should exercise more and eat less, right? You can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. You have a 120-ounce soda, you have to walk 4 miles just to burn it off. Or maybe run, I don't know. It's like a lot.
So I want to go back a step here. You talked about how the Pegan diet can, regenerate a lot of things. And one of them you mentioned is communities. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
About the way it affects communities and underserved communities. Yeah. I think, when you look at COVID's a great example where it sort of exposes the vulnerability of certain populations that are the result of our food system. And it's not just food security issues. It's also, the populations, for example, like African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics, they're far more at risk for getting sick and dying of COVID than the rest of the population. For example, in Chicago and New Orleans, there's 30% of the population is African American, but 70% of the deaths were from that group in COVID. And that tells you something. If you look at in New York City, if you go every subway stop from Midtown to the Bronx, your life expectancy goes down by like 6 months. If you look at Chicago, there's a ring there. Outside the ring, the life expectancy goes down like 13 years. I mean, that is staggering. That's like smoking, and part of the reason is that, the food that they have access to is terrible, and they don't have access to food that actually is going to help them be healthy. And there's a lack of education and awareness, and there's also a lack of, there's that sort of excess of marketing and targeting of these communities. So they're sort of attacked on many sides, and I've written a lot about it in Food Fix, which is my last book, about how some of these underserved communities are just so unfortunately susceptible to these problems. And by fixing those things, you can really lift up these communities, because a lot of the reasons they're disenfranchised or can't move forward is because of poor health and chronic disease and obesity related issues. And also in the kids, the kids who are eating crap food, and drinking sugar water, can't focus, can't learn, can't go to college, can't be successful in life, except if they're really, special. I mean, I think it's really tough right now to look at what's happening to the future generation. We're literally crippling our future generation by poisoning our minds with junk food. And there's I think Robert Lustig wrote a book about that, hijacking of the American mind or something like that. But the data is pretty clear on how these foods affect kids. I mean, one study I talked about in my last book was how, in juvenile detention centers, if they got rid of all the junk food and gave them healthy food, the violent crime goes down and violent behavior goes down by 91%. Needed restraints goes down by 75%. Suicide goes down by 100%. Well, think about it. The third leading cause of death in these teenage boys is suicide. If there was a drug that could cut suicide by 100%, like there's nothing that does that in medicine. Right. We'd be all over it. It'd be like a multi-billion-dollar blockbuster drug, and yet it's ignored because it's food.
Well, I mean, so I guess my question is, how does the Pegan diet fit into, creating accessible, affordable diets? When you're talking about Himalayan buckwheat pancakes that sound delicious and I would like to try them, how, a lot of communities don't have access to those kinds of ingredients, can't afford them, how does that play into this?
Yeah, it's a very important thing to think about. I think we are brainwashed to think that eating well is elitist, that it's exclusive to those who are educated or have money, and that it's not accessible to everybody. And I'll just tell you a quick story about this. And I think there's a section in the book on how to eat well for less. But I went to South Carolina as part of this movie, Fed Up, that was made a number of years ago with Katie Couric and Lori David about childhood obesity. And I visited this family of 5 who lived in a trailer. They lived on food stamps and disability. The father was 42. He was already on dialysis for kidney failure from diabetes at 42. and this wasn't childhood diabetes. This was, adult onset and type 2. And the mother was, 200 pounds plus, probably 300 pounds plus. The son was 50% body fat and probably 80 pounds overweight. And they were, struggling. And they lived in one of the worst food deserts in America. None of them worked. And they were really struggling because they wanted to get healthy so their father could get a new kidney, had to lose weight. So I said, look, rather than me lecturing you on what to do, let's just get some real food and cook a meal together. And I got the guide from the environmental working group called Good Food on a Tight Budget, which teaches you how to eat well for less and eat well for you, for your planet and your wallet. And I showed them how to cook turkey chili, a simple salad, some roasted sweet potatoes, some stir-fried asparagus. I mean, they didn't know how to cook at all. They had no knives or cutting boards. We had to cut sweet potatoes that were raw with a butter knife. Basically, it was not easy. Although when I left, I sent them cutting boards and knives to Amazon, ordered them for them. And it was interesting that first they loved the food, which they were surprised, even the father, who was pretty picky. And then the first week I said, listen, you can do this. I gave them a guide from the environmental working group. I gave them a cookbook. I said, you can do this. They figured out how to do it. They lost 18 pounds in the first week. In the first year, they lost collectively 200 pounds. The father lost enough weight, 45 plus pounds, to get a new kidney. The son lost 50, but he actually gained it back because he went to work at Bojangles, because that's the only place to get a job in the South was in these fast food chains. It's like putting an alcoholic to work in a bar. And then, he gained it all back. But I kept in touch with him and worked with him. And then he finally figured it out, and he lost 132 pounds or 138 pounds. And he was the first in his family to go to college and to go to medical school. Wow. So, and he asked me for a letter of recommendation for medical school. So that was really taught me a lot about the fact that partly it's education and it's understanding the skills and the knowledge. And in the book, I talk about how do you get food that's affordable and accessible. The studies show that really to eat well, it's maybe 50 cents more or not even a day per person, which for some families may be a lot, but most people can deal with that. And I think the Good Food on a Tight Budget is a great guide on how to eat affordably. You can, for example, buy cheaper cuts of meats and cheaper vegetables. And there's ways to enjoy real food without having to be breaking the bank. And then there's places you can get, like Costco or Walmart is the biggest organic grocer, and you can get direct from farmers now, ranchers. I mean, we buy meat direct from the ranchers. We go through their middleman, and you can get, from Mariposa Ranch, for example, you can get, if you buy a cow share with someone and divide it up and have a freezer, you can get grass-finished meat for less per pound than servings of McDonald's hamburger. So it can be affordable. You just have to do a little extra work.
Absolutely. And that's for all of us, not just folks in underserved communities. Getting back to some of the principles in the book, one of them that you mentioned is avoid dairy, and then in parentheses, mostly. And I've always been allergic to milk. I've never been able to drink milk my entire life. Why do you suggest that folks stay away from it for the most part?
Well, both paleo and vegan folks do eschew dairy, which is interesting. There's a recent article I encourage people to look at and not take my opinion. It was in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the top tier medical journal in the world, by Dr. Walter Willett and David Ludwig from Harvard, called Milk and Health. And there's also on Medium an article that sort of makes it more accessible for a lay reader, by Dr. Ludwig. And essentially what it challenges is all of our notions about the benefits of milk. Is milk good for your bones? No. Is milk important for kids to gain weight and grow strong? No. Is skim milk better than whole milk? No. It's like, does it cause other issues like digestive issues and allergic issues and even cancer? Yes. So it's not necessarily nature's perfect food unless you're a calf. And historically, we haven't really consumed much of it. Now, part of the problem with dairy these days is not that we can adapt to eat dairy, and there's a large number of people who can, but 75% of the world is lactose intolerant, so that should tell you something. That's the normal state. And what we don't know is the cows that we're consuming in America, and the milk we're consuming is from cows that are mostly Holstein cows that are bred for high milk production, that are milked while they're pregnant, that have a particular type of casein called A1 casein, which is often much more inflammatory and allergic and causes issues, digestive issues, than A2 casein, which is found in more heirloom cows or sheep or goat. And they're also raised in feedlots and pumped full of hormones and antibiotics. So there's a whole bunch of reasons not to consume traditional dairy. With that said, some people can tolerate A2 casein from sheep or goat if they're grass-fed. Some people can even get A2 casein from other sorts of cows, like Guernsey cows or Jersey cows. They actually have A2 casein, and there's other heirloom cows that you can get as well. So historically, we probably all were having A2 casein, right? And now we're having mostly A1 casein, and that's what's driving a lot of the inflammation. So I agree. I can't eat regular dairy, but if I have sheep or goat, I'm usually okay.
So interesting. Another principle in the book that I really like is to feed your kids what you eat, or what I eat.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. When I was growing up, my mom, she cooked for everyone. There weren't chicken nuggets or anything special for us as kids. And as a stepmother, I see it's hard. When you have kids, they want what their friends are eating. So how do you get kids to eat what you're eating?
Well, I look back on the intentionality around my own kids, and I even though I was not doing what I'm doing now, I was very focused on food and nutrition and studied in college, and I just made sure my home was a place of fun and pleasure and joy around food, and everything from planting a garden with the kids, watching them grow. I mean, my daughter, when we grew eggplant, and she pulled it off. She's like, "Where's the egg? Where's the egg?" That was an eggplant.
That's cute.
She binged on Brussels sprouts because we grew them in our backyard, and then we get them in the kitchen cooking, making a mess. I have an Instagram video I posted recently about a little boy who was in my kitchen. We made these buckwheat chai pancakes together, and he's so excited about every step of the process. And he ate all the pancakes, and he was crying the next day because he wanted more, wants to do more cooking. I think so. So getting kids involved is really important. Having family dinners is really important. Is a way of connecting families and having real food and cooking together. Those are special times. And I think most people now may dinner less than 20 minutes at a table while they're on their phone watching TV, each eating a different meal from a factory that's heated in a microwave. So that's not really a family dinner. And when you look at family dinners, kids who eat dinner with their families have less obesity, perform better in school, have less behavioral issues, less ADD, less eating disorders, do better academically. I mean, it's just interesting to see. And then lastly, you just make your home a safe zone. I mean, just don't have stuff in your house. It's a problem. I mean, my son was, when he was a teenager, was like, "Dad, I want to have some friends over, but there's nothing to eat in the house." And I'm like, "Okay." But what he meant was there's no crap. Right. And I said, "Okay, let's go to the grocery store. You can buy anything you want. One rule, no trans fats. It says hydrogenated, trans fat. You can't eat it." because that's just poison. So I'm like, you can't eat that. But he couldn't find anything. He was like, I can't find anything. All the pizza, all of this, all of that, everything had crap in it. So I think having your home be a safe zone will teach your kids how to consume right. Have fruit there, have nuts and seeds, have other snacks, have yummy food prepared. You can cut up stuff in the fridge if they want cut up fruit. Just make it easy for them. So I think having your home being a safe zone and doing a fridge and a pantry biopsy and purging everything that isn't promoting health is a good place to start.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to sort of, you're trying to combine, the paleo diet with a vegan diet. Paleo diets have been controversial for many reasons. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and the effect on sort of human health.
You mean meat?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the book isn't really combining paleo and vegan. It's sort of a joke. It's like, let's get out of the diet wars. It's kind of a spoof. And let's come up with these guidelines that are based on focusing on the information of food, the quality of food. Same thing with meat. So when you look at meat, meat is not meat, right? If you, for example, have a feedlot cow, and they've done this study, for example, in in Australia, where they compared people who ate a feedlot meat to kangaroo meat, which you can easily get there. Right. And in the feedlot meat, all the inflammatory biomarkers went up in the blood. With the wild meat, they all went down. Same meat, same amount of meat, right? Let's say 4 ounces. You got a profoundly different result in the body. If you're talking about factory farmed animals that are fed, all sorts of weird diets that are not natural to them, corn and ground up animal parts and Skittles, pumped full of hormones and antibiotics, raised in inhumane conditions. Those are things that should be banned. We shouldn't be eating that at all. We literally should just erase those from the face of the planet. And there's legislation in the Senate right now to do that in 2040. Hopefully it'll pass, but I doubt it. And if we understand that that's one kind of meat, then what about other kind of meat? What about grass-fed or grass-finished meat? And by the way, the factory farmed animals are also a huge contributor to climate change, environmental destruction and degradation, and soil erosion, and soil loss, and water depletion, and biodiversity loss. I mean, they're just a catastrophic disaster. However, does that mean that grass-finished beef or meat or wild meat is the same? And the answer is no. Russ Conser says it's not the cow, it's the how. Meaning, how was it raised? What's going on? So what I've learned is that there's obviously debate about this, but if you look at the science, clearly, with the grass-finished meat, you're getting meat that's raised in more natural conditions. It gets to forage around what it wants to do. If it's done in a regenerative way, it's having a wide variety of plants. Those plants actually, and this is work by Fred Provenza and Stephen Van Vliet at Duke, there's good evidence that meat contains sometimes as high as level of phytochemicals, which are from plants, as plants. So that's fascinating to me because they're eating all these plants and then the molecules from those plants end up in their tissues and then you can eat them and you can get the benefits. So for example, goats browsing on certain shrubs can have as much catechins in their milk as green tea, which is amazing. So that's crazy. So the key is, where is it coming from? And then in terms of the health benefits, I mean, if you look, for example, at people who eat meat within context of an overall healthy diet, and they've done these studies of like 11,000 people who shopped at health food stores, those who are vegetarians or meat eaters, they both had their risk of disease dramatically and death reduced dramatically compared to people who eat meat in the context of a traditional one American diet. If you're eating meat as part of a burger, fries, and soda, and a milkshake, that's different than eating, a small piece of grass-finished meat with, 80% of your plate being vegetables, right? Very, very different effects. And then how you prepare it matters. If you look at the Maasai, they almost only eat milk and meat, and yet they have very little chronic disease, if any. And how does that happen? Well, these are not the sort of modern industrial animals that they're raising. They're more heirloom cows, number one. Number two, they combine the milk with 12 different spices and the meat with over 20 different spices. And spices actually have the benefits of antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds. So they may neutralize any of the potentially harmful effects of meat. And a lot of the data that we have about meat is just so wonky because it's from large population studies where they essentially look at the risk of things. So for example, smoking, we looked at population studies and we saw that if you smoked, you were up to 10 to 20 times more likely to get lung cancer. That's a huge association.
Right.
When we look at That means right? It's like 2,000%, okay, increase, right? That's a 2,000% increase. When you looked at meat studies, they were done using feedlot meat. Second, they were done during a time where people who were actually eating the meat were not health conscious because they were told not to eat meat, but they did anyway, which means when you look at their other defining characteristics, they weighed more, they ate more, they 808 calories more a day, they ate more processed food, more sugar, less fruits and vegetables, and so on and so forth. They didn't exercise, they smoked more, they drank more. Of course, they had more disease, right? But when you look at like I said before, if people are eating meat in the context of a healthy diet, it may not do that. So these population studies don't show that much effect. And in those studies, the increased risk might have been not 2,000%, but 30 to 50%, which is not a really significant number when you look at these population studies. It should be at least 100 or 200% increase to see any kind of connection, because they're correlation studies. So we really kind of have gotten all upside down about meat. And I think it's really important for people to understand that, not everybody has to eat meat, but it is an important part of our human diet. There's a wonderful book called Nourishment. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Have you, Danny?
Yeah, it's great.
If you haven't had Fred Provenza as part of your conversations, you definitely have to. He is just, oh my God, this guy. He wrote a book called Nourishment about learning about our nutritional wisdom from animals and so forth. But it's just a brilliant poetic book. And in there he talks about how the world is one big restaurant consuming itself. We become food for the plants become food for the animals become food for us. It's like this, it's like the circle of life from the Lion King. But he does a beautiful job explaining it. And I think people are afraid of it because they think it's bad for the environment, bad for their health, and it's inhumane. And I think the answer is it depends, right? If it's a grass-finished cow, well, it's not bad for the environment. It may actually help regenerate soil and restore ecosystems and reverse climate change. It definitely, I don't think it's bad for your health. And there's some large trials that, if you look at, there's over 100,000 studies on meat on PubMed. And if you look it up, you go, well, half of them can say this, half of them, it's like you could go crazy. And I tried to read all the ones that were the most important studies. And, it's all over the place. So you have to kind of read between the lines. And I think that the bottom line is, I think grass-finished meat consumed as part of an overall whole foods diet where 80% or 70% of your diet is plants is not harmful and probably very healthful, particularly as you age, because you need to build muscle, and animal protein is most effective at that.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for explaining how not all meat is created equal. I want to turn to sugar now. And Principle 10 in your book is to treat sugar like a recreational drug. And we recently had Michael Moss on about his new book, Hooked, and how food, you can become so addicted to junk food and sugar and all of these other things. And so I really enjoyed reading about that, because we just talked to Michael and I learned all these things about addiction that I didn't know about before, but it really is like a drug.
Oh, 100%. I've written about this. I wrote a book called The 10-Day Detox Diet, which is all about food addiction and sugar addiction and how it's a real biological phenomena that based on the data. Our friend David Ludwig has done some of the good studies on this, where they looked, for example, my favorite study was where they took a group of overweight guys, and one day they fed the guys one kind of milkshake, another day they fed them another milkshake, and then they measured their blood levels. They looked at a brain scan, at their MRI. And the first milkshake was sort of and these milkshakes were identical in calories, protein, fat, and carbs, and fiber, identical. The only difference was the source of the carbohydrate. One was a quickly absorbed sugar, and one was a slowly absorbed carbohydrate. And the quickly absorbed sugar, which acts like sugar, obviously it raised their blood sugar more, insulin more, cholesterol, stress hormones, all that. And remember, these are identical calories, so it has profoundly different effects on your biology. Is what we were talking about before. But what more interesting was it lit up a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is the addiction center. It's what gets lit up with heroin or cocaine or anything else that we do that's addictive. So it's really clear. And when you look at animal studies, it's frightening that rats will work 8 times harder to get cocaine than they will sugar than they will to get cocaine. Wow. If they're already addicted to cocaine with an IV drip, they'll switch over to sugar if they can get access to it.
Wow. That's amazing.
If they and this is a horrible experiment they did, but they put them on an electric shock pad. And they gave them access to sugar. Wow. And they started drinking the sugar. They started shocking them, right? And they just kept eating the sugar despite getting electric shocks.
Wow.
Right. It's like us. We start eating sugar, and when we gain 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 50 pounds, 100 pounds, 200 pounds. How does that happen? It's like you look in the mirror like, people obviously are seeing their body growing, sure. but they can't stop. It's like the electric shock. So I think if you eat sugar in the context of an overall healthy diet, and you do it as a recreational drug, like I said, it's fine, especially if you're metabolically resilient. A little bit of chocolate or a little bit of this or that treat. Right. What I would say though is stick to real food. Like don't eat, an Oreo cookie or some weird processed food that's full of sugar. Eat something you make at home from scratch, or a piece of chocolate that's right. Whole Foods chocolate, like huge chocolate. Or my new favorite was like Honey Mamas. Is good. But I think it's really important for people to understand that it's the overall context of their diet, and these substances are really driving most of the chronic disease. So we talked at the beginning about the increase of 6 times hospitalizations if you're overweight or have a chronic disease, 12 times higher risk of death. I mean, these are real numbers that we should be paying attention to. And like I said, we have a pandemic upon a pandemic, so we're seeing this double whammy now. And I think that's the problem. We need to really get focused on cutting out all this starch and sugar from our diet.
Absolutely. Dr. Hyman, I've been wondering about something. People have been talking about how people are cooking more because of the pandemic, but I also have a feeling that people are turning to comfort foods more, that they're eating more processed foods. And this has been going on for more than a year now. When we
quarantine 15, right?
Right. When we come out the other side of this, how do we get people back? Those folks who, didn't follow a healthy diet or drank more, ate more sugar. How can we get back to sort of, recalibrating?
It's tough. I think, let's begin to think about, Biden's 4 initiatives of addressing COVID, the economy, social injustice, and climate change. It became really obvious to me that all these are related to food and food systems. And I think it's shocking to me that this issue is really absent from the conversation that's happening in the traditional media. You're talking about it. I've heard Bill Maher talk about it a few times, but you don't hear the government saying, hey guys, we're a metabolic mess. 12% of us are metabolically healthy. You can prevent COVID by upgrading your diet. You can prevent COVID by helping to improve your immune system by taking the right nutrients like vitamin D or vitamin C or zinc, which, by the way, Anthony Fauci's taking and they gave to Trump when he was sick. I mean, it's not like these are things that are controversial. And yet you don't hear anything about it. Like, yeah. It's shocking to me. Krispy Kreme was giving donuts to people who get a vaccine. It's the worst freaking idea you can actually possibly imagine.
Incredible, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Are you hopeful about the new administration?
I am seeing positive signs. I'm warily hopeful. For example, David Scott is the new U.S. Ag Chair of the Ag Committee. He's the chair of the Ag Committee in the House. Yeah. There are senators like Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren and others who are focused on this. And there's congressmen who are also, and women who are also focused on this. So I think there is a window and an opening, and I do see there's some impetus to move things forward in a different way. And I think what I've heard is talk about regenerative agriculture.
Right.
I've been in touch with folks in the administration as well. And in terms of climate change and food. And I think there's a definite openness and interest. I certainly made sure I got Biden my new book, The Food Fix, and his Kamala Harris got it. And so I know they have it.
Smart.
But
smart.
I don't know if they read it, but it's probably sitting there gathering dust. But anyway, my little effort to kind of move things forward.
Well, talking about politics, you say that eating is an agricultural, environmental, and political act and not just a personal one. And I'm wondering, sustainability is such a buzzword, right? It doesn't mean a lot of things to many people anymore. How do you encourage people to eat in sort of an ethical, healthy way?
I think it's just really figuring out what works for them and what their preferences are, and then within that, seeking out the things that are having a positive impact on your health, on communities, on the environment, on climate. So it's sort of aspirational. We can only do so much, right? We still have to have change from the top down, but a lot of us make a difference by changing what we're eating. And I think, for example, if you seek out things that are organic, it's going to drive the organic market. If you seek out things that are healthier, going to drive the more healthy foods. I was in a store the other day and I was just sort of marveling at the sort of plethora of brands out there around healthy food options. And I was like, wow, this is like, I remember shopping in the co-op in the 1970s, and it was like a dirt floor, burlap bags. The tofu was in a 5-gallon drum of water, and you have to grab it out with the tongs. It's like there was nothing that they had a package. But it was fascinating to see this change in the marketplace. And we're seeing big companies adapt to it. We're seeing us move the markets by our choices. So even now there's a regenerative organic certification that's being batted around. So imagine if food started being regenerative organic, and then we saw a movement to try to buy that food, or if more people bought regenerative grass-fed meats, that would drive the market. So we have a tremendous impact on what we're doing. And then it's the choices we make and what we buy has an impact as well. If we're buying, food that we're wasting or throwing out, well, that's having an impact on climate change and on, landfills. And plus it's just terrible to waste food. So I think we're all empowered to do different things to help, change the nature of things. But we have to understand that what we eat isn't just our personal choice. It has global impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to remind people that they can go to pegandiet.com to get the book. They can also check out your website, drhyman.com. I've been asking everyone, Mark, how they've been sort of handling the pandemic. Was it a book, a person, a movie, a Netflix series, something that's sort of gotten you through the last year?
Well, it may sound a little boring, but what I've done is just use this opportunity for someone who's been on the road for 30 years to get a routine down. So I wake up, have a little morning ritual. I work out most days. I go to bed early. I sleep well. I just focus on the things that really help me thrive, and it's just been actually really an opportunity for me to sort of double down on my own well-being, which is I've often sacrificed to at the altar of service. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, you look great. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you for writing this book. Again, go to pegandiet.com. Mark, thank you again so much. Again, always a pleasure to see you.
Great to see you too, Danny. Talk soon.
Stay safe.